Now, it could hardly have been a worse night for Labour, as one by one that so-called red wall of rock-solid heartlands crumbled into dust. And now, after the worst result for the party in living memory, and in this radically different political landscape, the political recriminations have already begun. In a moment, we'll be live from Wakefield, where Labour's Mary Craig lost her seat. But first, here's Jane Death.
Don Valley in South Yorkshire, and the Conservatives removed another brick in Labour's supposed red wall. A former mining community turning to the Tories, leaving Caroline Flint, MP for 2 decades, tearful and angry, saying Jeremy Corbyn hadn't spoken to working class voters.
What is the point of the Labour Party if we don't respect and represent those voices? People we have not listened to or respected enough.
What happened tonight for Labour?
I just want to have a bit of time.
Can I just ask you, is it time for Jeremy Corbyn to step down now?
Yeah. Yes.
Caroline Flint had warned Brexit voting areas might not stay loyal to Labour.
Time and time again on the doorstep, people said, I like you, I'm a Labour through and through. My dad was a miner, my granddad was a miner, he'd be turning in his grave if I didn't vote Labour, but I just can't vote Labour whilst that man is your leader. But alongside that as well was Brexit and the concern about the Labour Party standing in the way of getting Brexit through and moving on.
This was one of 59 seats lost by Labour, where campaigning on an end to austerity and the party's traditional trump card, the NHS, was outweighed by Brexit. The Conservatives have bulldozed Labour's traditional defences in the Midlands and the North. The biggest swing to the Tories of 18% was in Bassetlaw, where the Conservatives won more than half the vote. Even Bolsover, Labour since the seat was created and represented by Dennis Skinner for half a century, turned blue. And Bishop Auckland, Labour for most of the last 100 years, gave a Conservative MP an 8,000 majority. Bolsover voted 70% to leave the EU, one reason for the Labour loss, but another came up too.
I don't feel like Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, just from some things he said in the past and his previous record on some things.
Don't like Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn keeps his Islington seat, but for how long his position as Labour leader? He called the election results very disappointing.
I will remain the MP for Islington North, and I'm proud to represent the people of Islington North, and I'm proud in Parliament and outside that we will forever continue the cause for socialism, for social justice, and for a society based on the needs of all rather than the greed of a few.
John McDonnell this morning blamed a Brexit brick wall, not a failure of Corbynism.
If you look at what's happened in most of the seats, particularly in the northern seats, the vote shift has been from Labour to the Brexit party around the Tories. So, I think we just couldn't get through the Brexit argument, basically.
So this was actually all about Jeremy, yeah?
Now ex-Labour MP Ruth Smeeth, beaten by the Conservatives in Stoke-on-Trent North, said Jeremy Corbyn's unwillingness to come down on one side or the other on Brexit cost her seat.
It's the most important issue facing the country for a generation. But they didn't understand what our position on it was. So how could we have had, on the most important issue facing the country, our response being a fudge?
Labour is still the biggest party in Wales, but it lost 6 seats. The Conservatives winning some of their big targets, like Wrexham.
Wrexham has always been a Labour consistency, but they wouldn't have voted for Labour because of Jeremy Corbyn.
I voted Labour all my life. First time, I voted Tory this time.
Labour did win in places like Middlesbrough and Stockton North, and it took Putney off the Conservatives, where the winner, Fleur Anderson, noted it was a bright light on a dark night. But in the cold light of day, the question now is what next for Labour? Jeremy Corbyn might be on the way out, but where does the party go now?
Well, let's go live now to our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon, who's in Wakefield, one of that swathe of seats which switched from red to blue. Claire.
Well, yeah, Wakefield is one of those places that makes up the red wall we heard so much about during the election campaign. Places stretching from North Wales right across to the Humber. But now that red wall has been replaced by red islands dotted across a sea of blue. It's hard to overstate the scale of this political shift. So exactly what happened and why?
A new dawn rises on a new day and a new government.
Not so long ago, this was unimaginable. Like many places across the North and the Midlands, today, Wakefield is not red, but blue. Who did you vote for?
Conservative.
You voted Tory previously, or?
No.
Labour previously?
Previously, yeah, but not anymore.
Why not?
Well, nothing's been done in this city. I don't like Jeremy Corbyn one bit, so I've changed my vote.
Do you like Boris Johnson?
Nope. But I know he's going to get us out of Brexit, and I voted for Leave.
For 60 years, Wendy's been a Labour voter. Yesterday, that changed. Brexit, part of the reason, but not the only thing. Her vote for the Conservatives was just as much a vote for not Labour. How hard was it ticking that box that said Conservative
It was
Party?
hard, very hard.
How are you feeling today? They've got a whopping great big majority.
Didn't expect it, but I'm quite pleased, actually. Yeah. We'll just have to wait and see.
It's been Labour since before the Second World War.
Yeah.
Tory.
I think he might do a good job. He can't do any worse than anybody else, can he?
We spoke to one person who stuck with Labour. She told us she'd get grief from friends if she said as much on camera. And this in an area where it was once vote anyone except Tory. But not this time, not in this election. Well, the swings from Labour to the Tories weren't limited to the Midlands and the north of England. In Wales, Labour now holds 22 seats, but that's a loss of 6 compared to the last election. The Conservatives turned all of those seats blue, taking their total to 14. Plaid holds the other 4 constituencies. But while the Tories are clearly jubilant today, there is a potential drawback for them in the long term, because if this was the Brexit election, what happens at the next election with a new Labour leader? Will all of those Labour voters just switch back again?
Claire, thanks very much. Well, we're joined here at Westminster now by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Burgon, who held onto his East Leeds seat last night.
Morning, Matt.
Good morning to you. What went wrong?
Well, I think this was a Brexit election. I think that the issue of Brexit overshadowed traditional party loyalties, and that's why it was so different to 2017. We had a similar manifesto in 2017, the same leader. Fast forward 2 years, and I think it became the Brexit election.
But you can't really let yourself off the hook that lightly. It's not so much the Brexit election, but the election in which you didn't have a clear message on Brexit. Surely that's the difference.
Well, we tried to bring people together. It didn't work. The Conservative slogan of Get Brexit Done resonated with people. What we need to do now is analyse objectively and seriously where in the country we lost votes and who to, because it's not just the case that we lost them to the Tory party or to the Brexit party. In Scotland we lost to the SNP. In some London seats we were losing votes to the Lib Dems. So we really need to analyse it objectively, just as we had to analyse it objectively when we lost 5 million votes between 1997 and 2010 when we were supporting policies that were pro-cuts and pro-war.
But that lack of clarity, right, to come up with a new deal that you would possibly then argue against as you were, wavering between Remain and, very, very soft kind of Brexit, that lack of clarity just didn't play on the doorstep, did it? People were confused.
Well, the message that the Conservatives had on Brexit worked. I think our position was the correct position to try and bring people together. But look, the Liberal Democrats, they had a disaster when they took a different view on Brexit. They lost their leader, they didn't gain. So I don't think there was any easier way out when it came to the position on Brexit for us in this election.
The fact that there were former Labour voters, right, whose parents had voted Labour, whose grandparents had voted Labour in constituencies that hadn't voted anything but for almost a century, who still remember the bitter days of the miners' strike. The fact that they voted for the Tories, I mean, that must be astonishing to you. It must hurt.
Of course, and I'm heartbroken at losing some great colleagues in those seats, in other seats. So over the next couple of days, we need to analyse this objectively. It's not a simple picture. We need to work out where we went wrong, and we need to fight to win back those votes, whether they went to the Conservative Party, the Brexit Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens or the SNP. And we need to redouble our efforts to oppose the cuts agenda, which will now be forced through by this Thatcherite Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
You made a lot of promises about what to do about austerity and what you were going to give people, the amount of money where you were going to spend. Isn't the point that people just didn't believe those promises?
When I was campaigning in my own constituency and elsewhere, people weren't complaining about our policies of a £10 an hour minimum wage, taking rail, mail and water back into public ownership, stopping the privatisation of the NHS, or providing free childcare or free primary school meals. Those policies weren't complained about. Brexit was raised again and again and again.
As was Jeremy Corbyn. He was a real problem for you, wasn't he?
Jeremy was raised on the doorstep in the same way that Ed Miliband and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were when I was campaigning for them to be Prime Minister.
Okay.
And of course, some of the attacks by some of the right-wing papers on Jeremy did play through, but we need to analyse objectively and move forward in what will be a difficult period for us, but more importantly, a very difficult period for people across the country who will be suffering with universal credit, the bedroom tax, debt, not being able to get a house and the rest of it. We really need to move forward and redouble our efforts to oppose austerity.
Okay. It took Michael Foot 3 days to resign from the leadership of the Labour Party after his terrible defeat. It took Neil Kinnock 3 days to resign after his defeat. It took Ed Miliband 1 day to resign after his defeat. How many days is Jeremy Corbyn going to take?
Well, Jeremy will issue a statement in due course. I won't be speaking for Jeremy, and it's the National Executive Committee.
Do you think he should resign?
The National Executive Committee will decide the timetable for, in due course, having a new leader and a new deputy leader. I don't think that's a matter for today. What I want to focus on is analysing why we lost, how we lost, where we lost those votes, and what we need to do next.
You keep talking about analysis, but this is not a workshop. We're talking about some real, political reality here that is dreadful for the Labour Party. Should he not just go now? He's already lost one election in 2017. He's lost this one, according to his worst nightmares. Surely it's time to go.
Well, he's already said he's not going to stand at the next general election, so...
That's in 5 years' time.
So Jeremy will step down in due course. But it's only a few hours since some fantastic colleagues lost their seats. We need to do the number crunching. We need to see where the votes were lost in different parts of the country, because it's not a uniform picture.
Briefly, Richard, what do you say to those people in the Labour Party, on the more moderate side of the party, who are absolutely furious with Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters that they've lost this?
Well, I'm absolutely devastated that we've lost, because the people I represent and people across the country will suffer as a result. Just as we've analysed in the past when we've lost, in 2010 for example, we need to analyse again objectively, work together and move forward as a Labour Party, because people out there need a Labour Party fighting for them and fighting against austerity.